everybody, and welcome to a really special episode of the Afghanistan Project podcast. This is actually a crossover episode with the other podcast that I have started hosting recently called The Fighter Pilot's Guide to Living, where my co-host Taco and I basically track the trajectories of some very impressive careers. And during the course of filming, I got to know retired Commander Chip King, call sign Biff, who was with VF-213 when the attacks of 9/11 happened and whose deployment at the time was rerouted so that he could respond to those attacks. One of the incidents that took place during one of Commander King's flights led to a new tactic used over the skies of Afghanistan to support all of the ground personnel who came just a bit after VF-213 in order to push the Taliban out with the help of their Afghan counterparts. Many of those were Green Berets, who then worked with CIA Team Alpha. If you recall, I've had several members of Team Alpha talking here about their efforts to support their allies who kept them alive when they first arrived on the scene in October of 2001. So all of these things came together, and I had the amazing luck of getting introduced to three members of ODA 595 who were working with Commander King and his Rio, Michael Peterson, call sign Tongue, in order to support them and basically change the typical mission when they ran out of bombs to drop and call in some strafing runs where they broke the hard deck and supported ground forces because they were in a troops in contact situation and needed help. And what they did would actually become a tactic that others would use in the next months and likely saved some lives. So this is the first episode where we are talking to three members of ODA 595, Mark Nutsch, who was the commander of that ODA, Paul Evans and Mike Elmore, and then three members of VF-213, the aviation intelligence officer Nate Bailey, and Michael Peterson and retired Commander King. I really hope you guys enjoy this. I am incredibly grateful that I was able to see these men get together and talk about their various perspectives of the ground battle and the air war over Afghanistan.
What we'll do starting out kind of around the horn. So Mark, if you don't mind introducing yourself and give us a who you were and who you are now as we run around the table.
Hi, I'm Mark Nutsch. On September 11th, I was a Special Forces captain as the commander of U.S. Army Special Forces Team ODA 595, based at Fort Campbell, Kentucky.
Paul, introduce yourself.
I'm Paul Evans, Master Sergeant retired. I was the Operations Sergeant / the Senior NCO in charge of ODA 595 and had been their team sergeant for quite some time.
Awesome. Welcome to the podcast. Mike, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hey, Mike Elmore. Back at 9/11, I was a junior weapons sergeant for ODA 595, retired sergeant major out of 5th Special Forces Group.
Copy. And over at VF-213, we have a returning guest. Biff, if you don't mind introducing yourself one more time.
Biff King, or Chip King. I was the commanding officer of VF-213 and the senior strike lead on board Carl Vinson with Carrier Air Wing 11 at 9/11. Currently a retired, washed-up fighter pilot.
But a lot of stories to tell. Go ahead and introduce yourself, man.
Yeah, Mike Peterson, go by the call sign Tongue, T-U-N-G. I was a radar intercept officer in VF-213 at the time. I was doing what they call a super JO tour. So I was a Top Gun graduate out in the squadron working on tactics and being driven around by a fine fleet of chauffeurs, also known as pilots.
All right, and rounding out the guest list, Nate, go ahead and introduce yourself, please.
Hey, Nate Bailey. I was the VF-213 intel officer as a Lieutenant JG. I was also one of the targeting officers on board the Carl Vinson when 9/11 happened. I'm still in the Navy for a bit longer, currently a Navy captain, still doing intel work.
It is so awesome to have all of you with us. It's really, this is going to be a special time. I know we've already kind of pre-talked about a lot of these things. And so I think to get everybody on the same page here, we got to start back before 9/11 to where you all were before the attacks happened. And I think, Nate, you'd be a great person to start with. Where was 213 before the towers fell? Where were you in particular? Because you had done a lot of work prior to the cruise to kind of do some targeting work. And so can you give us a back brief on what you had done prior to that and what the plan was for that cruise before 9/11 happened?
Yeah, so just to set context, in spring, summer 2001, there wasn't like a whole lot going on other than keeping an eye on Saddam Hussein. So when we left San Diego in July of 2001, we were thinking, okay, we may go and do one or two or three response options. We may go and drop one or two or three or four bombs for the entire deployment. And so we were gearing up to be ready to answer if Saddam Hussein violated some terms of the UN Security Council resolutions. And so that's about the level of ambition that we were thinking was going to happen. And so all of that changed, obviously, on 9/11. We were rounding the tip of India, and history took over from there.
And you had done, so can you talk about what you had asked Chip to do before that? I mean, because you wanted to be part of that, and so you specifically asked him to do a couple different classes to get yourself ready for that.
Yeah, so I left Intel school, got the Black Lions, which I was super excited about. And so when I checked in, I had my office call with the skipper, and I asked Skipper King, I want to understand my team. I want to understand my customer. My customer was the air crew of VF-213. And I have come to believe, and mentors have told me this, that half of any job is nomenclature. You got to speak your people's language. And obviously, aviators, just like special operators, they have their own language. So, I'm the Intel nerd. I want to absorb as much as I can. So, Skipper sent me out to Top Gun, to the ground school portion, obviously, of Top Gun. And I just sat in the back and probably understood 50-60% of it. And the rest just kind of went over my head, pun intended. But I got to understand a little bit more of how a aviator thinks. And then I was also fortunate to go to Joint Targeting School. And at the time, it was still kind of a relatively new thing. A lot of the doctrine for joint targeting at the time was based on Allied force, which had just taken place in like 99. And so that's how we kind of learned the joint targeting process. I went to that. Normally fighter aviation intel types don't go to targeting school, but VF-213 had just gotten into deltas and nicknamed the Bombcat, and we may be called upon to do strikes. And so I wanted to make sure that I was in a position to understand strike targeting. So when we left for deployment, I was one of two. There was the air wing targeteer and then myself, who were joint targeting school grads.
That's really an incredible coincidence to have happened. And as a former intelligence nerd, I so understand that feeling in the early days that you must have had. Tom, what about you? What was it like for you as you're gearing up for that cruise?
Yeah, I thought I was going to complete my what they call Super JO tour, just kind of being the Top Gun recent graduate in the squadron that I was going to go over, get into the Persian Gulf and leaving on October 1st of 2001 and go to safety school back in Monterey. Needless to say, that didn't happen. But I thought it was just another Groundhog Day cruise. I had done a bunch of East Coast deployments, West Coast deployments, and no matter what was going on back then, we'd all wind up in the Persian Gulf at some point, sitting down there doing Southern Watch or some derivative of that. So I thought it was just going to be the same old thing. And obviously we were underway, as Nate mentioned, We were deployed when the attacks at 9/11 happened, and I just distinctly remember walking down a passageway and somebody's like, "Hey, did you hear somebody flew into the World Trade Center?" We're thinking small Cessna, like what a jackass. Who does that? The guy was probably some lawyer in a little Cessna committing suicide or something. And it wasn't until the second plane hit and everything went crazy. We actually went to general quarters, not as a drill. And then everybody showed up at the ready room, and quickly we found out what was going on. We didn't know at the time that we were the closest carrier on the spot. That came some days later.
Gotcha. And then, hey, Biff, so as you're going out in the front office and you guys are getting ready to go undersea a couple months before this, was there, it's Groundhog Day, so like your worries have to be most of the air-to-air threat, I'm guessing, right? Or potentially from Iraq if you guys go over there. Can you just talk a little bit about what was your thought process and mindset getting the squadron out the door, and what were you guys were focusing on at that?
Well, first of all, I was just happy that everybody was on board leaving port, when we took a head count. Um, and as Nate had suggested or mentioned, we were just coming around the horn, around the tip of India, making our way into the North Arabian Sea, and expecting to go right into the Gulf and continue with doing Southern Watch. Um, on on the 11th, I was actually airborne. It was a early night pinky recovery, but from an airborne threat, we weren't overly concerned about it. We knew they had some older equipment. Most of it was not flyable. I think the only thing that got airborne were helicopters. I think there were a couple helicopters, but after that, there really was no real threat, appreciable air threat.
Yeah, and so I guess just to cage me in on this, like nobody in your air wing was worried about Afghanistan. Maybe one person, and I think Nate will touch on that as we get to the day of in a moment after we introduce the ODA guys. But I think that's important that really nobody was focusing on it except for, I think we'll get to it again, one person, and just kind of wild when you look at what a changing point in history that was. Not that anybody could be prepared for that. Just pretty interesting.
Thought it was going to be a typical deployment into the Gulf and Southern Watch. The threat, was Iraq. We always had to look over our back for Iran, but yeah. And then, of course, it all changed on the 11th.
Yeah, and then so shifting gears to the 595 guys. Mark, do you mind talking about a little bit of what 595 was doing the days and months leading up to that 9/11?
Yeah, so our team had a unconventional warfare mission focus. Significantly in 2000, we had spent nearly 6 months in the country of Uzbekistan on a JSET, a Joint Combined Exchange for Training program, working with the Uzbek Spetsnaz. That really set us up on how to polish our unconventional warfare skills. It gave us the regional familiarization, and that's where we first heard about Al-Qaeda. Because they had helped to facilitate large-scale attacks across the country of Uzbekistan in 98, 99, and 2000. And Uzbekistan at that time was a relatively new partner or new ally to America after they'd kind of broken away from the Soviet Union there. We also had a big train up in part of Operation Desert Spring in Kuwait, where we continue to refine our unconventional warfare skills, working in small teams. But most significantly, we also had a close air support work up in there where we got to get out to Udari range there and do all the live fire training with our heavy weapons, mortars, indirect fire, and most significantly, various close air support platforms. And then right prior in August of 2001, we had a trip to Hurlburt Field, working with our Air Force Special Operations counterparts, again, working with close air support, calls for fire, everything from fast movers to helo gunships to the AC-130 gunships. And so that significantly was the last 2 weeks of August. And that was to be my last trip with the team as my 2 years in command of the ODA 595 team was up, and I was to rotate into a staff position right prior to my first day in the staff was on September 10th of 2001.
I don't think we picked that up in the initial phone call. That's pretty crazy. So pretty short staff job, I guess.
Yeah, yes, it was.
Wow. Paul, what was it like for you during that pre-time, doing all of the work that Mark just described?
I had been the operations sergeant for 3 years prior to that, which it's only a 2-year billet. So I was already in my short final. The ODA, since the first Gulf War, had been spending about 6 months a year OCONUS doing the similar training. So that was just normal everyday business. Mark, right before he left the detachment, he arranged the ODA 595 was a maritime ops detachment. We specialized in Zodiacs, surface swims, kayaks, and that kind of stuff. Before Mark left, he coordinated for us to infill another ODA about 35 miles down the Cumberland River. We started on the 10th, got fogged in overnight after we dropped them off and ended up spending the night on the Cumberland River. Me and Mike Elmore were on the same boat without any gear, freezing our butt off, and literally got off the river, drove on to Fort Campbell. I was driving my POV in because I had to get to meetings, got on to base, and the guys with the boats could not get on to base because they locked the base down after the first plane hit the towers. And I got to the mess hall and was actually sitting down with a plate of food when the second airplane hit.
I imagine that was a rude awakening in that. Do you remember, Mike, what was that like for you at the
I was
time?
similar to them, thinking, who is this crazy person flying through downtown New York with a big airplane? It didn't really dawn right away, but shortly thereafter it did. And then I can't remember exactly, but when they actually notified us having to call Mark up and saying he'd be coming back to the team.
Oh, wow. So that was the day after.
Well, it was a
Mark.
couple of days later.
Okay. Okay. Wow.
There's a backstory too, we're not going to get into it here, that the team was actually in the process of being completely broken apart and go our separate ways. And then 9/11 happened, and through some circumstances, everybody got put back together and got to conduct this mission.
I mean, it makes sense, right? If you had already run into Al Qaeda, you already had, I think this would actually be a great time, Mike, if you want to talk about the original mission, because you guys had, you'd done some personnel recovery. I think you said it during our first call. And so that was that part of the reason too. Mike, do you want to weigh in?
Well, one of our priority mission was unconventional warfare. One of our tertiary missions was pilot recovery. So we had trained on that, and that pilot recovery mission was the original reason we were sent to Uzbekistan first, is they thought there was going to be several aircraft getting shot down, and they wanted a group of guys that had been training both CONUS and OCONUS on being able to conduct that mission. And that is how we were the first full ODA from 5th Group to deploy to Uzbekistan.
Gotcha. And then so, hey, Mike, as like a young guy in the team, what was this had to be just like a flood of emotions, I suppose. Like, not only just seeing the towers fall, but then potential of you actually getting spun up. Had you guys was it all training up to this point, or had you guys done any other ops as a team prior to this?
Since I had been on the team, it was all training, and having been on a team for about a year and a half at this time, it's a lot of my time was listening. You had Paul, Mark, all the guys were quite senior, so I tried to soak up as much knowledge and experience as I could at the time. But on the 11th, as Paul and Mark said, we get back on Fort Campbell, and it was almost I wouldn't say business as usual, but we went straight to preparing. Paul went to meetings trying to figure out what's going on, and we were actually doing priorities of work, pretty much making sure, getting ourselves ready. We didn't know when we would go or what circumstances, but it was going to happen eventually. So the rest of the 11th, it was getting ourselves and our equipment ready to go. And I remember that was a long night, and morning of the 12th, it was business as usual. We did our PT and began, training.
Gotcha. And then if I remember from some of the books I was reading up to this, the gear you guys had, maybe not conducive to mountain warfare, but I remember hearing stories of just, taking the credit card and kind of buying whatever sort of gear you can get. Do you guys have any stories on that? I mean, anybody can answer this question.
Yeah, we most significantly, one of the devices as far as this conversation with close air support was, I think it was Pete, one of our young staff sergeants, came in one morning after 9/11 there and was holding up a little device, and he's like, "Hey, sir, every guy on the team needs one of these." And it was new to the shooting and hunting outdoor world. It was a Garmin GPS Vista that run on AA batteries. So we got approval. Our purchasing officers ran out, logistical folks out of the group headquarters, went and fulfilled a shopping list of some cold weather gear, camping stoves, some other things we needed refreshed. And most significantly, every guy on the team got one of those little Garmin GPS Vistas. We're very early in this, so they did not have the topographical data layer to load into the device. So I'm sure Biff remembers what an Etch-a-Sketch is, right? So you got to make your own map, right? Giving him a little love there. But device became invaluable as we got overseas because it run on AA batteries, which you can find anywhere in the world, which is significant in our particular mission that we would end up having. But you could change the coordinate format. The Army likes military grid reference system, Navy degrees, minutes, decimal point, right, in latitude, longitude, and then Air Force aircraft wanted degrees, minutes, seconds. So that device allowed us to interpret those coordinates.
That's amazing. We didn't catch that the first time around, and it is interesting because you guys carry different kinds of maps too, which
What was really important about that Garmin GPS is every guy could carry it. The detachment had 2 GPSs that they were assigned prior to that, but these were 5 to 7 pound things the size of a Bible that you had to carry, and we only had 2 of them. So you couldn't, it's just the weight carrying capacity, because we went in with just a rucksack full of stuff. You couldn't carry everything.
Yeah, I was just going to say that's important for the viewers to understand. Like, you guys aren't going with pallets of, and setting up fobs or anything. What you guys have on your back is essentially what you guys were going to go out the door with, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, our rucksacks weighed about 100, had to be max 100 pounds on infill in order for the helicopter to make it up over the mountain range. But and we actually had to drop rucks in every gear that you were taking in on a scale. Their crew from the 160th, that crew chief was not messing around, and we knew our lives depended on adhering to their weight restriction.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's probably some high flying up in Uzbekistan over the mountains there. Mike, you alluded to it with your training. Did you guys anchor in on specific types of training of just, shooting weapons and getting controls, or what was the focus for you guys after 9/11 and on that road to kind of what was going on? You guys knew potentially you were going to head down range, but what were you guys focusing on as you were getting prepared?
My recollection is, we went to a range every day, but it was a lot of work on our SOPs, and at the time, no one really knew a lot. And when you looked at the Taliban, no one knew much. A lot of the information, Paul had mentioned this last time we talked about, a lot of the intelligence and stuff we were getting was incorrect. So one of the things our Intel Sergeant Andy did was he started looking up lessons learned from the Russia-Afghan wars. So we were trying to, as we went through our own training, going through our own SOPs, live fire ranges, etc., we were trying to incorporate some of those best practices that actually Andy was able to find as he was researching that Russian-Afghan war from the 80s.
That's a really interesting point. Yeah, sorry, Beth.
Yeah,
go ahead
I was going to say that seems
down.
like the right time to pull in 213 again because, you guys, as things are shifting, Nate, you had probably first eyes on where this attack had emanated from and what was important. So can you talk about, the Coliseum list and what you saw and when you knew that this is where, and then who was charged with that information, because that's the best part, I think, of this story and in some ways too.
Yeah, so going back to July of 2001 when we were leaving California, Admiral Zalabar, the strike group commander, his director of intelligence, the N2, Commander McCrell, essentially brought everyone in the intel shop together and said, hey, each and every one of you are going to become a SME on one of the countries that we're going to be passing by as part of our cruise. So everywhere from China, Indonesia, obviously going into the Gulf. And as Tung and Biff alluded to earlier, we were thinking, again, the mindset at that time was keeping an eye on Iran, but probably doing some sort of few kinetic operations as part of Operation Southern Watch against the Saddam Hussein regime. So the officers, we got all the cool all the cool countries, right? I think I had Iran, one of the Hornet guys had Iraq, and another one of the Hornet guys had China, and And so it kind of went down through there. And so on 9/11, I was actually in the ready room, like good JO, hanging out in there, and my IS-2, an E5, comes running in kind of out of breath and says, sir, you need to get back to Civic, the Carl Vinson Intel Center. So I head in there, and like most Americans, I walked in as the first tower was burning, and the assumption was, oh my gosh, what a horrible accident. And I was actually mouthing that, what a horrible accident. And as I was saying accident, the next plane came in. And so we knew that we were going to war. We weren't exactly sure where, but it wasn't that long later. I want to say within a couple hours, I was able to talk to one of my colleagues who was the Air Wing Collections Officer. That's the guy that can tell what the different satellite to other collection means are happening. And he pulls me into his system there called Coliseum, which is the collection management system used, across the combatant commands. And he's like, Nate, check this out. And it was essentially prioritized tasking, everything from satellites to, P3s to U2s to you name it. Anything that can collect has some sort of prioritized tasking. And he pointed out the code, every commander, depending on their seniority, has a certain, priority code. And the priority code was essentially the highest it can go, National Command Authority, the White House, and it was all Afghanistan. And that's when I knew, I had heard about Saddam Hussein before. I was familiar with the Cole bombings. We had studied that. Obviously, the embassy bombings in Africa. So we knew Al-Qaeda as a transnational threat, not an existential threat to the Republic or anything like that. But when I saw the system that all of our national authorities were saying, get us everything on Afghanistan, it became pretty clear that we were going at least after Al-Qaeda. What we didn't know is if we were going after the Taliban, and I'll get to that in a little bit. But back to everyone being an expert on something. So I come out of there and like, okay, who's the expert on Afghanistan? And because it was so remote, so far-fetched, so impossible that we would be doing anything in Afghanistan, it was an ISSN, an E3 that got stuck, probably doing the research on Afghanistan. And, on that night of September 11th, this young sailor, probably a few months out of ISA school in Damnick, a few months out of boot camp, was the expert on Afghanistan. So same thing as Mike was alluding to, she had really the only corpus of information on the Taliban. Most of the Taliban were derivative of the Mujahideen that we supported in the 1980s. And so the DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, did have TTPs and essentially stories on how the Mujahideen fought. And that essentially became our baseline for not only order of battle analysis for the Taliban, but essentially their TTPs, their tactics. Everything from using mountain ridges to get more altitude, out of their AAA and, stuff like that. And that all came from that corpus of observation from the 80s. So, back then, that was still 20 years old. So obviously we all got really smart on reading up on that. But it was a very telling moment that you never know when you're going to be called upon to be the expert in the room, because I don't think anyone of us could have anticipated that. So that led into essentially, from September 12th to October 4th, when we start flying missions, that's not very long, but it seemed like forever, because in that time, the operation went from called an infinite justice to what we know it now as enduring freedom. There was also question for a period there if this was just going after Al Qaeda, or is this going to be a war against the Taliban as well? Is it going to be a counterterrorism operation, or is it going to be a land war? And it was during those few months, it felt like months, during those few weeks, like 2.5 weeks, that it shifted from this is going after Al Qaeda to no, this is going to be taking down the Taliban. And from a targeting perspective, from a targeting analysis, we knew very quickly that we would run out of targets, fixed targets, in about 2 to 3 weeks. And that to affect any change on the ground, we were going to need to have boots on the ground. And that's how the development of, all right, first couple of weeks of the war, fixed targets, but then after that, we would have to work with folks on the ground in order to affect change as soon as the Taliban became part of the primary objective.
Gotcha. And then Biff, do you recall like when CAG brought the skippers in? Was there a one kind of meeting that like, hey, this was the Taliban and Al Qaeda, we're doing this, start getting your strike leads prepped, or kind of how did that go, and how did you guys get the word to start planning?
As I mentioned earlier, on that night on September 11th, I was flying, and I remember when I manned up, they had called away the FOD walk down prior to the launch, and the Admiral Zelibor and CAG Bennett, TC Bennett, were on the deck, and they were deep conversation and thought. They weren't really paying as much attention to the FOD as they, would normally. But it just struck me as odd, and of course, didn't think anything of it at the time. We go on the launch. We get recovered early. It wasn't like an emergency recovery, but as Tung alluded to earlier, the ship did go into general quarters. So I land. Taxi out of into the D-arm area, and my gunner Lavoie runs up to the airplane. Plane is like, Skipper, America's under attack, and I'm like, what's going on? And so I head down to the ready room, walk into the ready room, and the first building had already been struck, but I'm in the ready room watching live the second airplane go into the tower, and realized at that moment, I didn't know where we were going. But I knew we were on the proverbial tip of the sword, and we would be integral in whatever response there was. I don't recall. I don't think we were all called. Of course, my responsibility then was, as commanding officer to the squadron, was to ensure that everybody was taken care of. We had a number of people, obviously, from that area as this whole thing played out, and we just wanted to make sure that they were contacting their loved ones, and everybody was okay. So from that, that was my area of concern immediately. And then we eventually we were called in. I don't remember if it, I think it was all the strike leads, all the most of the senior leadership in each of the squadrons went collectively in together. Nate may actually even remember, and I'm sure he was involved in whatever briefing there was. But yeah, that was my memory of it.
That's a really good point to kind of anchor down on, just for a touch of, before we can start planning the war, you guys are half a world away with sailors that have family in New York, and kind of step one is making sure that try to get in contact either with their family or whoever was there. I imagine, back in 2001, it's not like we had Wi-Fi like we do now on boats. So are you guys just handing the POTS line off and sending?
Yes.
I think email was even pretty. Did you guys you had email at this time still, right?
Yeah, we had email, and of course we had the POTS line and satellite. Yeah, I mean, it played out the whole time we were there. I mean, we were over 70 days. For instance, the Rio that I flew with on the very first night, Paul Gronemeyer, on October 7th, his wife was pregnant and she was having a difficult pregnancy. He ended up going home, and that's why I got stuck with tongue on some of these missions. But you got to take care of your people, and that was, of course, one of my most huge priorities.
Yeah, absolutely. Tung, from your perspective as a Super JO, were you part of the planning cells? I mean, as a Top Gun grad, I imagine, and you were FAC A at the time too. So was that even started to be talking about yet, or are we still not there?
We're not quite there yet, but from a traditionally Tomcat was an air-to-air fighter, and we had gotten the Lantern targeting system where we took the targeting pod, forward-looking infrared laser, targeting pod off the F-15E Strike Eagle. And because the Tomcat was generally a dumb aircraft when it came to air to ground, we made the pod really smart. We hooked a GPS into it. We put ballistics in the pod, and we actually wound up with a better pod than what was on the Strike Eagle. I had been in VF-113, the Jolly Rogers, previously, and we were the very first squadron to get the Lantern pod, night vision goggles, and things like that. So I had already done a full deployment with the Lantern pod. I had gone to Top Gun, and I came back, and I was at the East Coast Weapons School, SWATSLAND, Strike Weapons and Tactics School, Atlantic. And when I was there, I was not just a member of the staff. I was the laser guided and FLIR subject matter expert for the F-14 community, because Top Gun didn't have those. They were too important. They were out in the fleet. And I was also a forward air controller instructor. So I was teaching the fleet guys how to become forward air controllers. So I even went over to Kosovo to augment VF-14 and 41 to bring them some nice pieces of gear, infrared marker that you could use handheld out of the cockpit, bring them some new Lantern software, some things like that. So I had already been to war, over in Kosovo, and been through a couple Lantern deployments. So my focus was, we're not going to do the air-to-air thing if this is Afghanistan. We knew we were going to take out every aircraft they had that might marginally be functional. I think that occurred over the first two nights. We knew the fixed target set, the single surface-to-air missile system. They had SA-3, think old Vietnam era, not functional, but we killed that the first night of the war. That's what Biff and Groner and Shorn and I were targeting the very first night of the war in Kabul, the one radar-guided missile, SAM, in sight. And we knew the other fixed targets were going to run out real quick. So we knew very quickly we'd be moving to the mobile target set, which when you go do kill box stuff, we can find stuff, but it's limited from the air. Thus, ODA 595 was really crucial, because they could get in there and they could be our eyes to point out where targets that you wouldn't even notice from the air were located, and direct their destruction. So these guys, very rapidly, and this will be the next part of the story, as we move rapidly to the mobile target set, these guys were the eyes and ears for getting us onto that target set, or getting into areas that were rich, full of targets that then we would point out, and arrange the destruction of.
Now, it's an interesting thing, though, because when ODA 595 got on the ground, that wasn't even, you guys didn't even have targeting like soft lambs with you when you got to the ground. So can you talk about what those early days for you were like. What was the original mission? Because it wasn't that CAS mission from what you guys all said before. I don't know who wants to start. Mark, do you want to start on that?
Yeah, the original mission was to, as Paul talked about earlier, was personnel recovery, basically to get us in on the ground and be ready to help support downed aviators potentially, or any other isolated American personnel that were identified already in the country of Afghanistan. But there was a real quick spin up. Our team was notified on September 14th. That's when I got the call from Paul, told to return to the unit, and that afternoon, our chief warrant officer, Paul, and I were informed by our battalion and group leadership that our team would be the first to deploy out as a ODA from the 5th Special Forces Group at that time. Didn't fully know what that mission was going to be. We talked about, Mike touched on some of the training. Paul touched on we were in a rebuilding phase. As I said, I'd just been moved off the team, but we had 2 NCOs that were gone to school. They brought them, they would not bring them back out of school. So they got 2 other senior NCOs from within the company to join our team. So we had to get right away through our standard operating procedure. We revalidated our pre-deployment training package, waiting on aircraft. In between doing that, then we're doing a lot of self-study. As was discussed, there wasn't a lot of information or intelligence, so we're doing a lot of self-reading. They actually brought some 5th Special Forces Group retired veterans in to brief us who had actually been part of perhaps arming and equipping the Mujahideen with Stinger missiles in Afghanistan. So they brought those guys in to give us a little development and share of lessons learned on that. As we got over there, again, our mission changed. Quickly realized we're not doing CSAR or personnel recovery. And so we just continued to study and learn about the region and identify different militia leaders that could potentially be partners. And we're kind of the canary in the coal mine of prompting our group intelligence section with requests for information and, hey, what about this militia partner? What about that? And that was Paul and our senior NCOs taking the team through that area study and that mission analysis piece. And then we got the mission that we asked for to conduct unconventional warfare. And then fast forward to mid-October, as we were sitting there in Uzbekistan in Karshi-Khanabad, we got this mission to conduct unconventional warfare. We're to work with a CIA team, that interagency team that we'd be co-located and interdependent with throughout the entirety of our mission. And we were to be inserted 48 hours after we received that mission. We would be inserted by Special Operations helicopters from the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, also based there at Fort Campbell. So I'm gonna yield right there. I know I hit on a lot of things playing catch up. Sorry, I had a little technical difficulty. I'm now on my iPad, so it's our primary alternate contingency and emergency communications plan right here in action.
So,
Paul or Mike, you guys want to pick up and talk about how long you were supposed to be there and kind of the other things as you are getting ready to take on this mission?
When we left Fort Campbell, I had to tell my wife that I planned on being gone up to a year. I could not tell her where I was going or what I was going to do. And that was pretty tough because it was not long before Christmas and having to tell the kids, no, Dad's not going to be home for Christmas. And, that's quite a ways off for them. And they're going, what? But that was one of the things. Now in hindsight, because 5th Group is designated to that kind of AOR, 9-5 had actually years before done area studies of Afghanistan. Our intelligence sergeant was familiar with the organizations that were still active in Afghanistan. So it wasn't a complete loss. And the two senior NCOs that we got to the team actually had been on the team before. So it was they fit right in. And we were ready to go. We got to Afghanistan, like Mark said, our mission changed from conducting personnel recovery to building tents, waiting for a mission. We were without mission for a while, building tents, doing whatever we had to do. And then a mission came available, and the group S3 officer came and talked to me in the tent. And I knew him personally because I'd been around today. And the major asked, Paul, can your guys do close air support with B-52s? And I looked him in the face and said, why, yes, we can, sir. And he turned around and go, okay, be prepared to be given a mission. And he ran out to go tell the group commander we could do this. And as soon as he left the tent, I looked at Mike and Andy Marshall and said, hey, get me the procedures for doing ground support with a B-52, and thinking to myself, you don't do ground support with a B-52. What the heck? But we'll do it. Whatever it is, we'll make it work. And like you had said, we didn't have a lot of the technical equipment, but we had trained on the prior, when we were in Kuwait and other places, we'd done the talk on of aircraft. The aircraft had a much lower ceiling where we could see them coming in. You could see on a map and line them up use a map with a police terrain on the ground that they could see with an IP and talk them in from the IP to the target. And we could see the aircraft coming in, wings level, nose at the target, cleared hot, and they could fire it up. And that was the procedure we were going to go with when we got into Afghanistan. Because of how high altitude the aircraft stayed, and because Afghanistan is a brown world, brown haze, brown targets, brown everything, that was going to be very tough. So we had to adapt to that.
Yeah, we were.
Gotcha. And then
we were trained up by the group. I think at that time the group headquarters, a brigade size unit in Army equivalency. We had, I think, one tactical air control party, Air Force NCO that was assigned there, and his main job was to train all these special forces teams. And as I said, we had just gone through that training cycle the last two, prior to July, August, and we had done live casts in Kuwait less than 6 months prior to 9/11. And then, but by the training standards of that day and time, our team uniquely was trained, and it had just peaked in that opportunity and training cycle. And I seem to recall Paul saying right after the group S3 asked him if we could do it, he's like, it's a 9-line. It's just like, it doesn't matter the aircraft, the process is the same. And then here we are, literally an hour later, we've gone from being on the bench to dragging our gear out of our tent that we had erected, because that's special forces. You build your own camp as you go. And we drug it short distance, and we went into another tent where that would be our isolation and planning area. And within probably an hour, they were briefing us on the mission. What I like to share about that moment when I'm talking to officers in the years since is we joke, but our entire operations order would fit on 4 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper. And I joke that it was double-sided printed. That was how little information was known about what we were going to be doing. And a fair amount of that information was actually information our team had generated and sent up to hire. And they're like, okay, you guys asked for it. Here you go. You've got this mission. A to B, you're going to get on a helicopter in 48 hours. A CIA team's going to be here in a couple hours. You're going to be able to ask them some questions. The reason I bring that up is, our policy and procedures, like I'm sure in the Navy, our planning cycle is supposed to be 96 hours. And it was 48 before we were to be ready to insert. But weather delays would happen because of that and prevent the insertion of the 555 ODA. And I think we had another delay in there. So we got about four days, and then we were going in.
So when you're talking about getting your stuff ready and moving to the isolation, Paul, I think I remember you talking about this, or maybe it was Mike, but as far as maps go, and you guys are going to be calling CAS, you're talking about Brown and a Brown world, what type of maps were you going out the door with, if you could share with the audience? Because I thought that was pretty interesting.
Well, when originally they showed us the area, there was such a large area. We're talking the entire northern half of Afghanistan. When you use the typical Army map of 1/50,000, it was a stack of maps, that you couldn't carry. I mean, we're talking like that, big old pile. And there was no way we could carry them. So we had two 1/100,000, which was half that size. Mark had one, and I think Andy had one. And the rest of us had the survival map, which is 1/250,000. The 1/250,000 map doesn't have a lot of detail to it. And that is the map that we use to call in CAS with. At least my three-man cell did. And I know Andy was using the same, and he called the majority of the air in of the team.
It's pretty impressive. And again, like you said, you were expecting to be there a year, so you guys weren't even really marking up your stuff either, right? A lot of the stuff you were putting the coordinates and then either burning it or getting rid of it the day after, right? But it was just kind of all in your head, if I remember correctly.
What it was is because it's a UW operation, we're going in behind enemy lines. You have to expect that you're going to get captured, or if you were to get killed, you don't want the enemy to search your body or your stuff and give anything away that'll get anybody else hurt. So as in prior training that we had done, years and years and years, is you went through your pockets and got rid of everything but your ID card. My uniform only had U.S. Army and my name on it, no rank, no unit. When we got to a position, I would take a piece of paper and write my current grid coordinate down. Then I would identify targets. We'd write those grid coordinates down, and you'd use the Garmin GPS, the map, and some good guessing to see what the grid coordinate was and use to talk it in. And then when you were finished with those missions, you burnt the paper. You didn't put marks on your map. We didn't have cameras, so that if you were captured, you had nothing. You could hold out for as long as you could to keep them from telling anything.
Mike, what was that like for you as you were pulling into this? Because you haven't said as much about that early days of coming into Afghanistan for the first time. So how was that experience for you?
It was quite interesting. I do know when we left K2 to get on the helicopters, it was Colonel Mulholland and Sergeant Major McIntyre were at the back ramp, and they're like, hope to see you. Good luck. Godspeed. Hope to see you on the other side. Like, the reality hits. I'll go back to even right after 9/11. There was a email that was sent out by Colonel Mulholland at the time, and it was a email to everyone in group saying, bottom line up front, we're leaving. Like Nate had said, the tip of the spear. He said, we're the tip of the spear, and make no mistake about it, we're leaving. We are leading this thing, and if you're questioning your ability to do your job, you're in the wrong business. So, we already knew the weight of the mission, but things like that, put you in the right frame of mind, going in there. I think I talked about it, and I brought this up when we were together in it's October or November last year. One of the last things we did before we got on the helicopter is, as a team, after everything was packed up, is we watched Spies Like Us. So from a mental, your framework, what are you doing before you're getting ready to go into war? We're watching a comedy. Who does that? you try to balance, life and your time as you have it. But it was, getting in those early days, it was a lot of learning. We did a lot of training, great mentors, and Mark and Paul and Andy and all the older guys. We were well equipped, and that training really came through. You talked about the stingers. That was some of the training we did as well. They had a facility on Fort Campbell. I don't know if it's still there, but we spent a couple days going through stinger training. Just the training aids that they had, and indoors and tracking helicopters, fast movers, whatever it may be. Again, that was just some of the training that we did, just to prepare for, just you don't know what you're going to see, but we tried to fit everything in there before we got into country.
Gotcha. And then Nate, if I can kind of shift gears. Oops, sorry, go ahead.
I'd just like to point out one thing. Right before we left Fort Campbell, the commanding general of Special Forces came to talk to us. And I remember the handful of teams that initially had been kind of identified at that point. His main takeaway from that was, what's going to kill you? You need to figure that out every day, because things are going to change. And we took that to heart, to constantly reassess and figure out, what is it going to kill you? Nowhere on that risk assessment did it say horses. We missed a few things. But we knew, the guys knew from working, is our partners could kill us. The aircraft could kill us. Friendlies, friendly fire was very much at top of our mind. How do we mitigate all those things? Mines, small arms fire, all of it. The terrain, everything in Afghanistan was trying to kill you, from the terrain to the weather, in that. And by the grace of God, we survived it.
Scariest environment imaginable. That's all you had to say. To quote Armageddon. Nate, for you, so obviously you guys start your strikes a little bit. Are you aware from the intel side that boots on the ground are starting to make their way as this mission's changing from deliberate strikes and we're taking out everything the enemy has to, are you getting word that there's boots on the ground and you guys might be interacting with them? Or how did you first come across that info?
Yeah, that evolved over time. So essentially the start of the planning of the response, started shortly after 9/11. Teams flew in, Navy teams and some Air Force teams flew into the CAOC, the Combined Air Operations Center at PSAB, Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia at the time, to put the Master Air Attack Plan together. And, commander's objectives, that's what all targeting is based on. What do we want to achieve on the ground? Well, number one, achieve air superiority. So we knew all IADs, all anything that could pose a threat to the air. That was essentially the first night or two. And then it was command and control and all that. And so from, call it September 12th, 13th, to when the plan was, the cement was starting to dry on the first couple weeks of Operation Enduring Freedom. That was, say, late September. First couple days in October. Again, very, very busy days. Lots happening during that time as objectives shifted from targeting where Al-Qaeda may be to realizing we're going to have to take out the Taliban, and we're going to have to work with this thing that we have never heard before called the Northern Alliance, and learning about the Northern Alliance, finding out about Massoud and what happened to Massoud, by the way, on September 10th, and all that. And knowing that after those fixed targets were wrapped up, essentially, if the war started on October 7th, I would say, October 20th, around there, we were out of Schlitz in terms of fixed targets. I think that's Taco when we knew that we were getting word, I would say in late September, early October, that we would be working with these A teams, these CIA teams, to help affect things on the ground. And, there was a lot of chatter. Tommy Franks, he was the CENTCOM commander at the time of 9/11. there was a lot of chatter of like, hey, are we bringing in, an entire corps into Afghanistan? And politically, there was a lot of, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to keep a light footprint. It's going to be, as Paul said, unconventional warfare. We're going to be using special forces as a force multiplier, and we're not going to be having a core size sort of presence. So that was one COA that was being discussed back in late September, is like, are we bringing in an Army Corps to establish an occupation force? And that National Command leadership said, no, we want to move quickly, and move quickly became working with the indigenous forces on the ground through our special forces and CIA teams. So I would say we knew that probably early October that's where things were going, and then as the war, or as the air war started, operations October 4th, but kinetic operations October 7th. It was pretty soon after that, I want to say mid-October, that we knew this was going to be transitioning to a ground FAC and FAC-A sort of operation.
Copy. And then Biff and Tung, if you guys, sorry, Beth, go ahead if you want to jump in.
Oh, I was just going to say, Biff and Tung, you guys also were doing something else that we haven't really touched on, and that's taking a lot of TARPS photos to, get ideas of what's on the ground that doesn't need to necessarily be smashed. But I think the plan was that information would go to the ground personnel, right? When you guys were taking those pictures, is that correct? Can we talk about some of that imagery that you were taking? And I think a good closing for today will be whether that imagery got to where it needed to go from the ODA perspective. So Tung, Biff, whoever wants to take that.
I'll let Tung take that.
Yes, is naval aircraft. We had the TARP system, Tactical Airborne Reconnaissance Pod System. It was one of the last manned recce systems that were really out there before drones started to dominate the battlefield. So as Nate mentioned, prior to kinetic starting on the 7th, we spent a lot of time flying up into the area, as we would say, taking frames and clicking ass, which meant photo reconnaissance. And we would have a series of target sets, and we had a variety of different cameras in there. So we were kind of looking at, first and foremost, airfields, what's there, how many aircraft are there, what looks like it's flyable, could they put something up in the air against us. We were also looking for other things on the ground, potential fixed target set. The mobile target set's not that useful going after even that surface terror missile system. They'd move pieces around every couple of days, right? Because Tomahawks and some cruise missiles are really good at flying to coordinates where something used to be, hours or days before. But we did do some things for what we call IPB, intel prep of the battlefield, and the idea was to get that to mainly the air crews, the targeting. Now, we did take pictures of some other things, but we knew, as Nate said, this was going to transition quickly to a mobile target set. And, fixed, time-late manned recce is not that great against that set. Now, that being said, the Lantern targeting system had a thing called FTI, Fast Tactical Imagery, where we could record our video and we could take still shots from the video. In fact, as the weapon was impacting, we could hit a burst and it would take picture, and then we could review those in the cockpit, select imagery, and send it back via data link over the radios to the ship. We could relay it through the AWACS or through an E2 where they're getting stuff, minutes after. We could also send it to ground units. So had Mark and his team taken little laptops with little radios, we could have literally received pictures from them up in our cockpit that they could send us stills, and we could have sent them images back, but we hadn't quite connected the dots there. To Mark's point, the Northern Alliance and the Taliban looked identical from the air. So while we could find stuff that was potential, quote, targets, until the CIA guys and ODA 555 and 595 got there, unless we were told, go to this area and everything in this area is bad, and if you find a military target, blow it up, a convoy of Northern Alliance looks just like a convoy of Taliban. And until we had their eyes on the ground to positively identify friend from enemy, we were a little handcuffed up there from the altitudes which we were dropping.
Yeah, Beth, I think that's a great point Tung raises. We had some great photographic interpreters on the ship. We had some great imagery analysts, but you can't tell the difference between a Northern Alliance ally and a Taliban or Al Qaeda adversary. And so the boots on the ground for that differentiation piece, in addition to the targeting piece, was absolutely critical. And from our perspective, this whole fast tactical imagery thing, this was like the newest thing. And I'm sure intel officers now, Taka, your intel officer, near real-time imagery is just kind of like, what they do now. But at the time, that was like the latest and greatest. It was the first time FTI had been deployed in combat. We were sending all that to the CAOC, the Combined Air Operations Center. I will tell you, I assumed that it was getting to the guys on the ground. And it wasn't until meeting all these Army brethren here that I realized they were not getting the imagery that we were collecting. Headquarters was, but not the guys on the ground.
Exactly. And so Mark, Mike, Paul, do any of you want to weigh in on how valuable that image might have been and the way that you got intel when you were on the ground? Just to close out for this evening.
Really, it would have been kind of useful on the infill and some of the drop zones that we had to do. But like Nate said, we really couldn't tell friend from foe either. So we had to get our friend, the Northern Alliance guy, to actually point out where the enemy was, who was the enemy, and everything. And the pictures would have been nice, but without them pointing them out, it really didn't matter.
Yeah, that video stream, again, we fight way differently now, right? 25 years later, so we're coming up on this, than we did in 2001, okay? Again, we didn't have armored vehicles. We didn't wear body armor in the course of this mission. We only had 2 communications windows twice a day with our higher headquarters, 150 miles away in another country. The bandwidth for satellite-capable radios was far different. So would have been nice to stream some video and get something, an image off that aircraft. Yes, it would have. At no point in the nearly 2.5 month long plus mission that our team had on the ground did we get intelligence from a higher headquarters, signals, imagery, or otherwise, to help us in the course of that mission. Our intelligence was 100% driven by human intelligence gathered by our partner force that sent, small teams at an American's request to go look over a hill somewhere and then try to come back and tell you what they had seen. But keep in mind the literacy rate in Afghanistan. They could not read the maps we had for the most part, those commanders, but it's their backyard. They could passionately and vehemently describe to you there is an enemy force at this location, and they would say the name of the village. And now I'm looking at a map in English, trying to phonetically go, where is that map at, that location at? So lots of communications challenges had to be worked through. But the team, in that unconventional warfare situation on the ground, our team did incredible work through our Afghan partners and our allies to help target and identify enemy positions and armored vehicles. And then our team became the 21st century glue technologically with our radio communication systems to coordinate those strike aircraft to come in and do what they did. And we had an aerial armada of aircraft overhead, literally every manner of U.S. aircraft in the inventory except for the A-10 that was not based forward in theater. But we had B-52s, B-1s, B-2 bombers even at times. And then, of course, the Naval and Marine Corps aviators off those 2 aircraft carriers, and then the Air Force coming out of the Gulf Coast countries, and those B-52s out of Diego Garcia. So just an incredible effort. We also had resupply aircraft coming in. Our special operations C-130s were dropping lethal, non-lethal aid for us on multiple drop zones nearly every night. And then we'd have C-17s flying high and drop humanitarian aid in where we needed it as well. But just incredible, air effort that we knew we had called a lot of CAS. The Defense Department case study that was done about our mission that was chartered by CENTCOM and Special Operations Command showed that we conducted over 300 airstrikes in that 21 days. I'm pretty sure that is a record. Our small team of Americans there is credited with destroying the Taliban Army of the North. And we did it with the help of you men on this call and countless other men and women off those carriers in every service. I'm pretty sure we had, if I remember right, we even had Allied aircraft, Brit and French, come in as well to help support that. But I just want to say thank you. And it's been great to get to reconnect with you all after nearly 25 years.
We're going to break in here for now, and you can find more of this incredible story over the next 2 weeks. So please keep coming back for more, and can't wait to see you. Tasha Kaur.